Welcome to another edition of Who's Better Baseball. We are live here on our YouTube channel and the Just Baseball Twitter feed. I'm happy to be back after missing a week with a little bit of a sickness before a vacation. The throat was tightened up on me. I was like, Patrick, I need you to fill in. You got Kevin on. Great show you guys had last week. And now we are back with 5 exciting topics today. How has baseball been going for you since we last spoke?
Good. Look, we know baseball is a marathon season, so if you got to go on the IL for 10 days, that's a good trade. So we can have you for the full 162 the rest of the way. Can't exactly say the same for Chris Bryant here in Colorado. Otherwise, yeah, baseball season's heating up. We're through the first month of the season almost. I'm almost getting sad that we still don't have 6 more months of baseball. We only have 5+ months of the regular season, and then there's another month of playoffs. I guess everything's okay in general.
For sure. And I think we're finally getting to that point where it's like 100 plate appearances for a lot of the hitters. Starters have taken like 5 turns through, relievers, 10 appearances. So we're starting to get a representative sample, which is going to make our job on this show a lot easier because we're trying to debate certain things, comparing players, comparing teams. And now it's just not, oh, well, I guess that team that played the White Sox 7 times in the first 10 looks pretty good. But what are they really? Now we're starting to get a sample size that allows us to really dive into the numbers on some of these guys. And I want to start off today with 2 shortstops who I think the perception nationally would probably be that one guy is much better than the other because he's been a little more established. He already got the big contract, and I'm talking about Bobby Witt Jr., who is the clear face of the franchise for the Royals. But here's Gunnar Henderson. And if I ask you right now, Patrick, who's better, Bobby Witt Jr. or Gunnar Henderson, and you actually take a minute to look at the numbers, I think we start to realize that this is a really good conversation between 2 young stud shortstops.
It's so exciting that these 2 guys are going to be playing against each other for 10+ years, and both in the American League, so they'll see each other a little bit more frequently if they were in different leagues. But yeah, you're right. I think the edge in many ways to many people has to go with Bobby Witt Jr. Has that bigger pedigree. As soon as he was drafted, he was a part of that conversation as one of the top prospects. Gunnar Henderson, of course, a 2nd-round pick for the Orioles, so kind of overshadowed even within his own organization, where Bobby Witt Jr. was almost immediately, once he was selected, was the guy for the future for that organization. And it's kind of interesting too that, Henderson did win the Rookie of the Year, whereas Witt was not able to do that. But last year in the American League MVP award voting, Witt Jr. 7th, Gunnar Henderson 8th, right next to each other. So this is going to be a conversation. This is how we're going to pay the bills, I think, for the next decade. The Who's Better Baseball pod. Are they talking about Witt and Henderson again? Yeah, we are, because frankly, it's a great conversation.
It's just crazy to see the comparison of the numbers because I had the thought, I'm like, all right, let me see how close these guys are. Going into today, WRC plus, you have Bobby Witt 168, Gunnar Henderson 169. F4, you have Gunnar at 1.5, Bobby Witt 1.6. So they're playing each other to about a dead heat right now. You see a little more power from Gunnar. He's got 7 home runs. Witt's got 4. Gunnar has driven in more runs. Bobby Witt has scored more runs. They're both solid defensively. It's kind of just pick your flavor, which one you like more. But I think to shine some light on Gunnar Henderson, again, he doesn't get that same recognition. He's kind of overshadowed by Adley Rutschman. Even Jackson Holliday is this uber prospect that everyone was saying, oh, he might be the shortstop of the Orioles. No, I think Gunnar's going to hold on to short. Jackson is already playing second base, and I think that'll continue because Gunnar's been so good defensively at shortstop. And these are also guys who started off getting some time at third base and have kind of grabbed that keystone position as well.
Yeah, that's been a big part of Gunnar Henderson's value, whether you're looking at Fangraphs or baseball reference. They're how a B-WAR is calculated. That's actually a big edge. So despite the fact that, Bobby Witt Jr. played a full year there in 2022, whereas Henderson just debuted, he's got an extra 100+ games, Witt Jr. does, but yet, if you're looking at wins above replacement, Henderson has actually been the better player overall. Looking at a lot of the rate stats as well, offensively lean heavily towards Gunnar Henderson here in the early going. So you're right. I think the conversation is a lot closer than a lot of people would think. And Witt Jr., Sure, he's got a veteran guy like Salvador Perez, who we'll talk about here in just a little bit. As someone that he's certainly not in his shadow, but look, he's got a big brother that's going to guide him through the way. Whereas Gunnar Henderson, he's one of several young brothers right there with as you mentioned, Jackson Holiday, Adley Rutschman, Grayson Rodriguez, so many of those young Orioles players. So they're kind of sharing the spotlight with one another. Whereas Witt Jr. is the cornerstone of the Royals franchise right now, but when you look at the numbers, you're right. I think it does favor Henderson in a lot of ways.
It's pretty nuts because I think Bobby Witt was kind of a sneaky MVP pick going into the year, and Gunnar was not getting any of that love. But again, like you said, the numbers have been there for Gunnar Henderson, and I think maybe this will be the year. Maybe it'll take a couple years, but at some point we might be talking about Gunnar Henderson being the face of the Orioles, not Adley Rutschman, not Jackson Holiday. It just might be him. I think the one separator that might give Gunnar the edge long term is we're seeing it early right now, but can he tap into more game power? And it might just be by virtue of the ballparks they play in. They both maybe play more like a pitcher friendly park, but Kauffman is just brutal on hitters to drive home runs out. Gunnar gets to play in the AL East. A lot of those stadiums in the Central also play big. So I wonder if that will even just give Gunnar an eventual edge because the numbers might just look a little more gaudy.
Yeah, that's such a fair point with the ballpark obviously favoring Henderson, left-handed hitter, so he doesn't have to deal with that just expanse of grass out in left field that they've created, the kind of the anti-green monster, if you will. It's just so far away. Instead, he's got the short porch and shorter porch, but you're right, he's got Yankee Stadium. And also, look who's around Henderson, as we just kind of established. Much better lineup protection. Royals have a solid lineup right now, and they're playing well in general. But there are more of those guys around Henderson, more of those guys in front of Henderson in the order, even the bottom of that lineup too. That Orioles, run out there 1 through 9 each and every game. That gives them more opportunity for those RBI. So, Henderson, edge to him as far as he's got a silver slugger on his resume already. Witt Jr., he's got those stolen bases and he's got the contract right now, but that's going to make one guy a little bit more hungry than the other. It's so exciting to be in the middle of this, to see them go back and forth, especially because they play the same position.
And, when we look at long term, one of the interesting things to me is Gunnar Henderson is a Boras client. So you just wonder, is he going to be in the free agent class of 2029, this huge big ticket option? I mean, I wonder how old he'd be. I guess he'd be 30 years old by then, maybe even younger than that, maybe 20, 28. So it's going to be fun to watch their careers. Like I said at the beginning, Bobby Witt, because he has a contract, because he's the guy, I think when most of the people might be tuning into this show or the video later, just see the topic, they'd say, oh yeah, it's Bobby Witt Jr. But Gunnar Henderson deserves that respect. Who would you give the edge to right now? Are you going Gunnar or are you going Bobby Witt if you had to pick a shortstop for the next 10 years?
Wow. If I was going the next 10 years, I think at this point I probably would go Gunnar Henderson, but I prefer Bobby Witt Jr. right now. I enjoy his speed. I enjoy the electricity with which he plays the game again, having that pedigree, knowing what it means to go through those, serious slumps. He's just a little bit more fun to watch in a place like Kansas City where, they love their baseball, and he's a bit more of a rarity than with Henderson, again, kind of distracted a little bit by the other guys that are in that lineup and on that roster. So I would take Witt Jr. right now, but if you're asking me the next 10 years, man, that left-handed swing from a shortstop like Gunnar Henderson, that's a rarity right now. So yeah, I'd lean towards him. Are you going Henderson too? Are we making this a 2-0 sweep for Gunnar?
I think it's such a tough one. I mean, I think of all the things we've debated on this show up to this point, this one might be the closest one where, especially just looking at what they've done at this point in their careers, it is very, very similar. I think I would probably lean Witt, but not by much. I think Gunnar has really kind of changed, my perception of what he's going to be with the way he performed in the second half, how he's gotten off, such a great start. And it helps too that he's on. I think that the thing that I'm trying to separate in my mind is putting these players in a vacuum, because I think Gunnar's in just such a perfect situation where I feel like the numbers might just be better, particularly over the next 5 years, however long he's in an Orioles uniform. Whereas with Bobby Witt, would Gunnar Henderson be as good if he was on the Kansas City Royals? Is maybe the point where I say I think Bobby Witt might be just a little bit better, but man, it's close.
It is. And even if you try to shift things a little bit and say, well, let's look at their age 22 season for Henderson, that was last year after he did get a little bit of a taste in the majors in 2022. Whereas with Junior, 22-year-old, that's his rookie season. That's him coming up in 2022. So those numbers skew heavily towards Gunnar Henderson there. So it's just interesting how their ages have been so close together. But Henderson, doing it a little bit earlier and in many ways with a lot less pressure too.
Yeah, for Witt, like you're saying there, it was kind of just a rough first year, and then it was last year that it broke out. For Henderson, it was kind of a rough first half, and then he came strong in the second half. So yeah, he adapted to that learning curve a little bit quicker.
Henderson walked, or rather, Bobby Witt Jr. walked so that Gunnar Henderson could run, right? Because he laid the groundwork. Hey, play some third base. We got a good defensive shortstop, and then we'll slide over. So the Royals kind of patented that move. Orioles followed suit. Witt Jr., Gunnar Henderson. This probably won't be the last time we talk about those guys in 2024.
No, not at all. I think when you look at time, I actually got to kind of check here. A quick Google search here. Top 10 shortstops in baseball. Hopefully just baseball's list comes up pretty high. Let's see where we had them ranked to kind of close this out, because I know they were both on our list. I know that Bobby Witt was higher up, but I think Gunnar was pretty high up there, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, we had Gunnar at 6, and then we had Bobby Witt at 4 with Bo Bichette in the middle. I think the funny thing about it is now I would not take Bo Bichette over Gunnar Henderson. So he's already leapfrogged one guy on this list, probably into the top 5 shortstops in baseball, and who knows where he'll end up by the end of this season.
Yeah, if Who's Better Baseball doesn't work out, we can do Let's Rank them, and just every week just rank the top whatever position players. Not a bad idea.
People love top 10 lists, so it could be a pivot point for us. Let's stick with the Orioles for our next topic here, because we have one on the top prospects that are on this team. They keep on promoting guys. Austin Hayes goes down. Oh, who cares? Let's give Heston Kjerstad a shot, and who knows? Maybe our team could even get better. At some point, we're going to have to even discuss how they fit all these guys onto one team. But just if we're talking rookie of the year odds, who has the best shot to be make it 2 years running for the Orioles? Is it Colton Cowser, Jackson Holliday, Heston Kjerstad, or the field? There's other guys waiting in the wings in AAA. Who would be your pick right now to be the rookie of the year from the Orioles?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to check BBWA voting. Could the entire Norfolk Tides roster get a first place vote in the American League Rookie of the Year award voting? Maybe. But let's just go traditional and look at one player at a time. I'm rather surprised to say that I think Colton Cowser is probably the best bet right now for that going into the year. I think Jackson Holliday is the number one prospect that everybody had. Heston Kjerstad, a really great story after kind of having his career derailed a little bit from injuries. For me, a guy who's I was rooting for and had a certain connection with, because in 2020, for those that may remember, during the pandemic, there was nothing happening. So in my previous company, that year's draft, it was like I knew the top 500 players inside and out. And so Heston Kjerstad, going that early, kind of as a surprise at the University of Arkansas, was okay. Let's keep an eye on this player and track his career. But Cowser's probably been that guy so far. I think he might even be the favorite right now in the American League, depending on what odds maker you go with. And you love how that he's kind of fit in really well there at Camden Yards with the fans, mooing every time he comes up to the plate, calling him the milkman, wearing the white and black patches everywhere, dressing like cows. So it's like nobody's having more fun right now than Orioles fans.
Looking at the odds at BetMGM, which is a partner at Just Baseball, Colton Cowser plus 250. Behind him, Evan Carter plus 300, Wyatt Langford plus 400. And then you get to Jackson Holliday at plus 700. Everybody else has much longer odds. Kjerstad at plus 3,000. I think the thing with Kjerstad is we just don't know how long this is going to be. Is this just a short stint for a couple weeks? Hayes comes back, they make the move, send him back down. But what he was doing in AAA, ridiculous. He was hitting 349. He was getting on base at a 431 clip, and he already hit 10 home runs in 25 games. So Kjerstad has the power to really make a name for himself quickly. but he's got to hit the ground running or he might lose a spot. So I think that's where Kjerstad probably falls off in this conversation. We can also mention Kobe Mayo, who's had a great start to the season in Norfolk, like so many. He's hitting 340. So they have all these guys that are tearing up. But like you said, Cowser is doing it at the big league level from jump, hitting 345. He's already hit 6 home runs. He's slugging at a 759 clip. We talk about weighted runs created plus. He's got a 228 WRC plus. So he is 128% better than your league average hitter. He's already at about a 1.5 when it comes to his WAR total. So yeah, Cowser is the man right now, which is crazy because again, it's one of those things where if you're not plugged into the Orioles, casual baseball fans, the perception would be Jackson Holliday, number 1 prospect in baseball. But Cowser is the one that's producing. He's also, 24 years old. He had more time in the minor leagues to develop, where Jackson Holliday is still just trying to get his feet wet and has struggled out of the gate.
Yeah, he's almost in a real sweet spot because, again, going back to the pressure, going back to expectations, you see it this time of the year in particular. And so to not have those same expectations, you're sitting pretty there. And yeah, this is a guy in Colton Cowser who's batting 7th in the Orioles lineup. So again, he's in a real sweet spot. He's got protection. Holiday too, batting 9th, which on one hand, a much less pressure packed spot. On the other, you go, I'm hitting 9th in the lineup for what I imagine to be the first time in his life. T-ball, you don't think a young Jackson Holliday was hitting 9th in T-ball? I know for a fact he wasn't, because there's plenty of stories in Denver about people that covered the Rockies in 2007, and he was hitting wiffle balls, taking off hats of media members in the Rockies clubhouse. So no, he's always been like a leadoff hitter, number 3 guy in the lineup. So for Cowser to be doing this, really impressive. And we kind of be remiss a little bit if we didn't mention, the great start by Jordan Westburg and Grayson Rodriguez, 2 players that they did exceed rookie limit, so they're not eligible. But, again, those are guys where, hey, if we kind of skewed the numbers a little bit and said, well, this is their first full season, they would also be in this conversation.
Yeah, I was just pulling up Westbrook's stats. I'm glad you mentioned him. He's hitting over 300. He's getting on base at a 379 clip. He's hit 5 home runs so far. He's got a 185 WRC plus, and he's right there with a 1.3 F WAR just behind Cowser. Those 2 guys at that bottom part of the lineup, it's crazy how loaded this Orioles team is. They're getting just a ton of production down there. Obviously, it'll taper off at some point, but you have so many players on this team that are just young. They've gone through the minor leagues. They're ready to contribute, and they must be having the time of their lives now, just all playing together on this squad. I don't know how you fit all of them together on the same team, because the fact that Kjerstad's up, but he could be back down. You have Kjerstad and Mayo waiting in the wings. Like, how do you get all these pieces on the same roster? At some point, do you just trade a veteran? But then I guess that's my last question to you on this, kind of moving away from Rookie of the Year. Do you just keep the depth? Because it's great right now. Hayes goes down, plug and play Kjerstad. Or at some point, do you have to clear the way for the young guys and trade some of the veterans and get some value? It's crazy to think they trade Anthony Santander, but would they? I don't know.
Yeah, you keep the problem. It's a good problem to have, right? You
Yeah.
definitely deal with that, and you keep the depth, because as soon as you go away from that, as soon as you were to get rid of maybe one of the more veteran guys, Santander, probably a good one, because I believe he's a free agent after this year, right? So that would be creative. Are you how much are you actually benefiting when you take a guy like that out of the clubhouse? But put him aside for a second, a player like him, a veteran presence. Once you get rid of that player, now you don't have that depth to say, we need another option, right? Imagine if you didn't have somebody like Jordan Westbrook to slide back over to second base. If Jackson Holliday is struggling, you're just kind of stuck, right? You don't have the depth. So the only way you have the depth is by keeping it. So it can be struggling, I think, for some fans who want to see those young guys come up and get those opportunities. But that's a good problem to have. Not great for the individual player, but for the team to be able to mix until later on in the season, where if something isn't working out, then you can go that route and turn the keys over to the young player. So I don't think we would see the Orioles do something like that. That will be very much something to watch. If Mike Elias does something similar to what the Brewers did, where they trade Josh Hader, but they still were able to bring in another closer, a nice prospect in William Contreras. We should probably talk about him perhaps. But you were still able to add by subtraction. I could see the Orioles, they have such a luxury right now that I don't think they need to subtract at all. It's just pack that clubhouse full of dudes that are full-time players that could bat in the middle of any lineup.
I think at the deadline, they had to look at what they need, and if they need another starting pitcher, they got the depth to go out and acquire them. It's just going to be interesting, that balance, right? If most teams, if they're trading a starter, they're going to want one of the young guys. So do you trade a Kobe Mayo because you have the depth to do it and get another arm in that rotation? It's crazy to think, too. They had Joey Ortiz. They traded him for Corbin Burns. Obviously, Burns working out well for the Orioles, but Joey Ortiz is getting on base at a 392 clip in the Brewers lineup and playing some good defense all around the infield. So they just have an embarrassment of riches. They did tanking right, and now they can have a window here with new ownership. It can be a very long runway for them. So
yeah, I was going to say the thing that they also do really well, I think, is develop at the major league level, which, some teams struggle to be able to do, right? They were able to get a Rule 5 pick in Anthony Santander. Ryan O'Hearn just kind of totally discarded by the Royals, and they pick him up and they make him into something really special. So there are a lot of guys that once they get to the majors, that's kind of their finished product. But with the Orioles, that's not necessarily the case. They continue to develop, they continue to get better, and it's an embarrassment of riches. They did tanking the right way.
They did, which leads me to my next topic. You teased the William Contreras one, and we're going to get to that. But I think it's interesting to go from Orioles to Astros, because the Astros are maybe showing us the future of the Orioles when they get 7-8 years down the line. Is this the end of a dynasty? It's been a brutal start, and I think we tweeted this out at Just Baseball. I think they got off to a 7-16 start, and no team has ever started off that poorly and made the playoffs. If there's a team that could do it, it's the Houston Astros, but they've just been ravaged by injuries with that starting rotation. You get Verlander back, Javier goes down. Framber's still in this limbo where we don't know. Is he going to need some surgery on that elbow? Is he going to be back this year? Lance McCullers has been in purgatory for years, it feels like. When are they ever going to see him back? Hopefully they get Urquidy, but they have, and also Garcia, but they have a lot of young guys in this rotation that are just not holding up. You have Jose Abreu. There's just a lot wrong with this team. Are you ready to say, the Astros will not make the playoffs this year? It's been 7 years in a row in the LCS. Are they going to just be out of it before October for the first time in a long time?
I'm not ready to make that statement just yet. I'd be more inclined to say something like that about the St. Louis Cardinals, right? But I think the Astros, with such a veteran squad that they have, can be patient enough to know that, okay, it might take all 162 to lock this thing down, right? There are some seasons, particularly in the AL West the last couple of years, where the Astros, were kind of the front runners all season long, and it was just maintenance, right? And then you can even kind of tweak things accordingly for the final week or two to get your rotation in order. And now this might be one where, hey guys, we're really going to have to put pedal to the metal all the way through September. And I think they'll be able to do that, right? Like, look, they're behind the 8 ball in many ways. But I'm not ultimately not ready to rule them out. This weekend they're playing one of the two get right teams in baseball, not the White Sox, but the Colorado Rockies in Mexico City. That can obviously be momentous for them in shifting things. They just got back Justin Verlander, as you mentioned. That's going to be critical for their rotation. And you know what? They are getting those contributions from Altuve, Kyle Tucker. Yordan Alvarez has been good. He still has another notch to go up. And then Jeremy Pena, Yainer Diaz are two guys that have been, providing, contributions on both sides of the ball. So there's still some things that are going well, but in general, they haven't been going great for first-year manager Joe Espada, and that's where it really becomes tricky in general.
Yeah, for me, I think I actually am ready to sell my stock in the Astros and say that they're not going to make the playoffs, because it's such a big hole. I mean, you got to climb out from 10 games under. Yes, they can do it, but I think the American League's going to be very competitive. It's not going to be an 86-win team that's going to get a wild card spot. I think you're going to need to get up to 88 wins. And now if you're 7-17, and I'm looking right now, they're already losing against the Cubs. Spencer Arrighetti gave up 4 runs to the Cubs early in the first inning. And so maybe they fall to 7-18. They might get right, but they're 11 games under, and you're 25 games into the season. So to me, it's just a matter of this rotation. If you told me that they're going to get Framber back and they're going to have Javier back soon, and they'll have that 1-2-3 of Verlander, Javier, Framber with Ronel Blanco in the mix, all right. Like, now I can buy in. But right now I'm seeing every fifth day you got Hunter Brown, JP France, Spencer Arrighetti, like that bottom three of the rotation, it's killing them. And then the bullpen hasn't been good, although I think that'll steady itself. I don't expect Josh Hader to be terrible all year. I think they'll find a way to have a good bullpen, but it's tough when you are playing from behind. So your lineup really has to come back. You're in these tight games, and then your bullpen's got to cover bulk innings on top of it. So they have to figure out this rotation. If you told me that the rotation is going to be healthy next month, I guess I can buy in. But if they're 15 games under when they get healthy, it's a huge hole to climb out of.
Now, we know the Astros always find pitching. They just need to find all of it this 1 year. That becomes, a lot more difficult. It's funny when you say, being 10 games under 500, if they lose today on Wednesday, you go to 11 games under, and that's a daunting number. But a loss today means they're 6 games back of first place of the Seattle Mariners. That doesn't seem as bad. That doesn't seem as unsurmountable. That's just for the division, right? And maybe the West only has the one team, the division winner. But I think when you look at it from games behind, that could be a number where you tweak it a little bit and say, okay, maybe it's not as daunting, right? Jose Abreu, he can't possibly be this bad both at the plate and defensively. You said Josh Hader, right? 8.32 ERA. If you look at his expected fielding independent pitching, 2.25. So the dude's gotten a little bit unlucky in general. So, this weekend, again, I really think is going to be interesting for them going to Mexico City. That could possibly, turn things over for them just a little bit. I think maybe the saving grace is the fact that, a team like the Mariners, who I got to see over the weekend, they look really solid. They're only 1 game over 500. The Rangers are 12-12. So the division for them, thankfully, has not totally run away with things like in the East with the Orioles and Yankees or in the Central with the Guardians. So I think that's been probably the biggest indicator for why I'm not ready to go all out on them just yet.
It's pretty nuts to see the records in the Central compared to the records out West, because I mean, we had a topic on this show a couple weeks back, who had the best division in baseball, and we were speaking very kindly towards the AL West with those 3 teams atop it. And now even the Angels could get in the mix this year with the way that division is played, which is crazy. I do think that it helps a lot that no team has gotten off to a great start. I think for me, I just have more confidence in the Mariners and the Rangers being able to get right quicker. And by the time the Astros get it going, is that 6-game difference going to be 10? If it stays at 6, you're right. They can narrow that gap. But the Mariners in particular, their starting pitching, if you compare those two teams, like, I just think that rotation's starting to show itself. And that they have the horses there to get through the marathon. I'm just very concerned with what the Astros are doing with this starting rotation. But, like I said, look, if Javier and Framber are okay, then I'd change my tune entirely.
Yeah, and like you said, Mariners, their rotation is dominant, right? They pitched incredibly well at Coors Field in not great conditions. That was impressive. Texas really hasn't started to play their best version of baseball, and again, they'll be a team where maybe in the second half they'll have their biggest surge with everybody being on the IL. So that's 2 real big teams that they've got to work around. Maybe a wild card will be the way to go. Still so much left of the season, but it's going to be interesting. You're right. They've dug themselves into a hole, and they will definitely need to climb out of it somehow under Joe Espada's leadership there. We'll see if that happens.
Yeah, we'll see. And for the Rangers, they got Max Scherzer making a rehab start this week. I know we got Wes Jones covering that for us at Just Baseball. So, they have a lot of reinforcements coming down the stretch with, hopefully DeGrom comes back, Tyler Mahle. So, it's going to be a crazy race in that West. If you had to tell me, which divisions you want to put money on, I think that's the one I'd be least inclined to bet anything on, because I can't decide. But I would say that I have a lot more faith in the Mariners than the Rangers right now, but anything can change. And as soon as we doubt the Houston Astros, no, we did a little bit last year. Guess who's in the ALCS again? So we'll see. We'll see. But let's move from a team that had a terrible rotation right now to some of the teams that have gotten off to great starts thanks to their starting rotations. We got 5 teams that we have narrowed this down to. And granted, a team like the Mariners might have the best rotation in baseball. Just hasn't looked like it early. The Blue Jays, another one. But so far this year, we got the Phillies, the Red Sox, the Royals, the Yankees, and the Orioles. Of those 5 teams, which one jumps out to you right away?
Wow. That's hard. That's really hard to say right now. I do like what the Yankees are working with, especially with, fingers crossed, Garrett Cole comes back. I think they have probably the best track record of anybody other than the Phillies, right? Of being able to sustain this kind of success. When you look at the names, right? I think it lines up really well. They're starting to get contributions from other guys besides Juan Soto in the lineup. It just feels like the Yankees are a little bit, overdue for, staying locked in for a full season. So they're not the most fun team to watch pitch, and I don't think they're even the best team when we get to October baseball. But for the season, I would give an edge to the Yankees right now with Rodon, pitching pretty solidly. Marcus Stroman, Nestor Cortez, that's a good threesome right there. And back of the rotation has been solid as well. Are you agreeing with me on that one, or are you? I want to hear you say something nice about the Phillies. That's what I want. I think everybody's waiting for you to blow up the Phillies. Go ahead, Ryan Finkelstein. Talk about the Phillies glowingly, please.
Yes, you lead me right into it. I think the Phillies have the best rotation in baseball, and the thing for me, it's a couple of different components to it. Ranger Suarez has been unbelievable to start the year. 1.36 ERA through his first 5 starts and 33 innings from Ranger Suarez, a guy that I think at one point in time we thought, is he a kind of a 5 and dive guy, a great 5 and dive guy, but still the guy that's not going to be length. He's giving them length, but I also think that this is the year that Zach Wheeler wins the Cy Young. Wheeler's got a very interesting building of a Hall of Fame case because the regular season numbers aren't there, but he has already built up a legacy for himself in the postseason that can carry him when he eventually gets to that voting process. And I don't think his career is going to go down anytime soon. This is the year where I think he can actually win a Cy Young. You look at that NL Cy Young race, Strider goes down. That was the big competition. Burns gets traded out of the league. I think things are sort of lining up in Wheeler's favor. Sandy Alcantara also out for this year, and he's got a 2.30 ERA. He's going to eat innings, and he's striking out almost 11 batters per 9. The Cy Young case, it's Ranger Suarez, maybe putting together the best full season of his career. Aaron Nola right now has been their least productive pitcher, and still he's sitting with a 3.16 ERA. Spencer Turnbull out of nowhere with a 1.23 ERA. That's not going to hold up, but it gives them depth because they still have Taijuan Walker who can come back. They have Christopher Sanchez. I think this Phillies team has the best rotation in baseball, and who knows? Maybe they can compete with the Braves in the National League East this year, because if this rotation stays this good for the whole season, those are the teams that can really start to build a lot of victories.
I'm so glad that you mentioned Zach Wheeler as a Hall of Fame candidate, right? Because there's some guys they're on that trajectory from day one, and even if things aren't even working out great, they're on the trajectory regardless. And some guys, they got to build their way up to it. And Wheeler is at that stage now where you look each and every year and he makes his case stronger and stronger. And really, in my head, when I think of Zach Wheeler and what he's done over the last 5 years since he's been with the Phillies in one of the best contracts handed out to a player as far as performance goes, he reminds me so much of Max Scherzer. If you think about it in that, where, he was good with Detroit, won a Cy Young late, right? But it took him a while to figure things out. And the same has been true for Zach Wheeler. And he just seems like one of those guys who goes out and shoves. You can rely on him for close to 200 innings each and every year. And it just kind of reminds me of that. He's getting those opportunities in October. So So Wheeler, has to be probably the best pitcher in that bunch. Corbin Burnes, I think you can make that case. The guy who stole the Cy Young Award, if you will, from him a couple years ago, with much less innings pitched, but some flashier rate statistics. I think Kansas City has a sneaky good staff that could last this season, right? I think they could survive with Cole Reagans after we saw what he did in the second half last year, saying, okay, fine, I'm still going to get my World Series ring, but I'd rather be in the ballpark for it on the field. Okay, whatever. What he was able to do, Bradley Singer, it finally, coming to fruition for him a little bit. The two veterans and Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha, kind of, two sides of the same coin. And Alex Marsh, pitching really well, a guy who just exceeded his rookie eligibility last year. Like, those guys have been really solid, and they have some arms in the minors too that can back that up, I think, a little bit. But I think those are guys with maybe a slightly better pedigree than some of the young players for the Boston Red Sox. I think between those two, Royals and Red Sox, I'd be more inclined to say the Royals are going to keep up their success than the Red Sox. How about you?
I don't, the Red Sox rotation baffles my mind. I don't understand how they've been this good. I'm looking at the ERAs right now. Cutter Crawford with a 0.66 ERA through 5 starts. What? I mean, 27 innings. So he is probably going out there for just 5 most of the time, but still, that's insane. Tanner Houck looks like a completely different pitcher. Had that ridiculous, Greg Maddux-esque complete game where he didn't even need 100 pitches to get through it. I'm buying Houck. I'm buying that they're much better than we expected them to be. I mean, Brian Bayo has been the worst pitcher in that rotation so far, and he's sitting with a 3.04 ERA. So I buy that they are a good rotation, and that's going to keep the Red Sox more in the mix than I gave them credit for going into the year. But, I mean, Cutter Crawford's not going to do this the entire season. At some point, he's going to have a blow-up start. I'd imagine when he faces the Yankees or the Orioles, some of those lineups, eventually that's going to wear on this rotation, have it go up against those teams. The Royals, I mean, I think their rotation really does make them a sneaky, I don't know if I want to quite call them a favorite yet, but in that Central team that absolutely can win it. But I think if we're really boiling down the best rotation in baseball, it probably comes down to the Yankees and the Phillies. Although, should we talk a little bit about what the Orioles could be this year with Corbin Burnes in the mix?
I mean, it could be, right? You got to wait and see what happens with John Means. Is Kyle Bradish going to be able to return? He's obviously a big part of that conversation. We mentioned Ronald Blanco kind of coming out of nowhere to do what he's been able to do, obviously with the Astros, and Baltimore getting that same kind of contribution of, like, who is this guy, and Albert Suarez, doing that obviously for a few less starts. I think the Mariners should be in this conversation as well. They've been, fantastic. They struggled a little bit the first week plus, but I mean, over the last 2 weeks, they've been incredible. If you're looking at Fangraphs WAR, they're the third best starting rotation right now. They can do it, right? Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, 3 guys that were in our top 10 AL West best pitcher rankings. So, and they still got Bryce Miller, Brian Wu, and Emerson Hancock, who was maybe the best of the bunch this weekend at Coors Field. So, there's a lot of good starting rotations. It's that narrative of coming out of nowhere and surprising. So let's talk about them versus Mariners, maybe just being as good as we were expecting, right? I mean, Castillo started 0-4, so that wasn't what you expected out of him, but he seems to have righted the ship a little bit. It's good that we're getting staffs picking up for these star pitchers like Strider and Bieber and Cole going down to injury. We're getting full staffs kind of doing that work, and you know what? Maybe that's the real answer to who steps up and who replaces all that excitement. It's all 5 days you go out to the ballpark, you're going to see somebody good who can deal.
I think going into the year, I would have had the Mariners for sure. And so I'd still be inclined to think that they're going to be a top 5 rotation in baseball when it's all said and done. One last team that I want to spotlight before we nail down our final answer on this is the Giants as a team that in the second half, Giants and Rangers really, but the Giants have a sneaky good rotation. I watched Logan Webb go up against the Mets yesterday, 8 shutout innings, just absolutely dialed in. His control is second to none. Didn't walk a batter until a tough at bat against Brandon Nimmo in that 8th inning. So he is spectacular. Jordan Hicks, he's got a sub-2 ERA through 5 turns in the rotation. No one expected that one. Keaton Winn looked pretty good the other night too. Blake Snell just went on the IL, so we'll see what happens there. And they can get Robbie Ray back too. So if eventually you get to a point where it's Webb, Ray, Snell, Hicks with Kyle Harrison and Keaton Winn, the Giants have the potential to have a great rotation. It's not great now, but it could be in the second half.
Alex Cobb was an all-star last year. He comes back, you've got something. You know, they really liked Tristan Beck. You got to hope that his upper arm aneurysm is kind of working through. Ethan Small, you know, a left-hander, where I think they were planning on using him more out of the bullpen. You know, he looked nice with Milwaukee last year. So you're right. They're in the second half. This is going to be like a totally different conversation, because going back to Boston, right? They're the team that it seems like it's the most unfathomable thing that a 16th round pick at a Florida Gulf Coast University in Cutter Crawford, you know, is finally coming to fruition at age 28. How much gas is going to be left in the tank once we hit those dog days of summer? And they've faced that Yankees lineup a couple times. So, man, it's a slog. Baseball is a slog. So it's going to be a lot of it is going to have to do with that depth and finding pitching. Going back to the Astros, you got to find pitching, and even when everything is good, it's hard to just keep status quo. You could always turn over a new rock and find some more pitching.
You know, the Dodgers are a team that hasn't had a great rotation so far, but eventually when we get to the playoffs, it might be Glasnow, Yamamoto, and Kershaw. Who knows? So it is a conversation that is evolving. But if I had to lay my money down on one team right now to have the best rotation in baseball, wire to wire, it's the Phillies. It's Zach Wheeler. It's Aaron Nola. That 1-2 punch has been probably the most consistent in baseball over the past 5 years. Just when you talk about the innings that you're going to get, the dependability, and then having Suarez as their 3, maybe having this career year with some of the depth that they've added by getting Spencer Turnbull off the scrap heap. I like the Phillies as the best rotation in baseball right now. Are you sticking with the Yankees for your answer?
No, I've flip-flopped. No, I mean, I like their top 3. Again, it's the pedigree that can be attractive, but shoot, you're right. I think Wheeler has the best shot of anybody on those 2 staffs to win a Cy Young Award. Aaron Nola is no slouch, of course. And then, you know, I do believe in the career year for Ranger Suarez after getting to watch him a lot last year in the postseason against the Diamondbacks. You know, really impressive. That's in there. And you don't have enough rotation spots, because once Taijuan Walker comes back, I mean, you know, that in and of itself, you know, suggests that it's a strong rotation all the way through. They're good as is, whereas the Yankees, if they do get back Garrett Cole, then, you know, we got to have this conversation again. But right now, you know what? You've convinced me. I do think the Phillies have the best rotation in the game right now.
And they also have, I don't know if Andrew Painter can make it back this year or not, but he's waiting in the wings. Mick Abel. So they don't have the best farm system, but they have a couple of arms that could contribute to maybe down the stretch. So Phillies, as much as I hate to say it, particularly with Zach Wheeler, because first year of Locked On Mets, 2019, go back in the archive. It is me just constantly saying, give Zach Wheeler an extension. Don't let him be a free agent. And I've never been more upset to be so right, as he ends up going to Philly and might end up in Cooperstown with a P on his plaque. Definitely hate that.
Are we blaming Carlos Beltran for this at all? Is there somehow where he's tied in and you say, you know, it's got his stink on it? So no, are we saying he's scot-free and the Mets were just glad to have gotten something for Beltran from the Giants?
You know what's crazy about the Beltran thing is it's the Beltran. It's kind of like when you follow a pick in the NBA and it goes all over the place, and it's this journey has traveled. Maybe I should do an article on this at some point. But Beltran, in a weird way, turned into Francisco Lindor, because I think one of the comp picks the comp pick the Mets got for Wheeler signing with the Phillies was one of the prospects that turned into Francisco Lindor. So Carlos Beltran lives on with the New York Mets. It has been a long, winding journey. But yes, Zach Wheeler for Beltran was a trade once upon a time that was great for the Mets. Unfortunately, they did not hold on to him, because they could have had Wheeler and Lindor on the same team, I'm sure. And that would have made the Mets much better over the last couple of years. So Yeah, another kind of interesting note on that too. I was thinking you mentioned who was the comp with Wheeler Scherzer. I was thinking not necessarily in pitching style, but in Mets legacy, Mets lore. Wheeler might be like Nolan Ryan as far as a guy that came up with the Mets and then was much better for other teams throughout his career. Will never really be identified as a Met.
And it's wild to think whose stock would you rather have in getting to the Hall of Fame first, Zach Wheeler or a guy who was unceremoniously suspended by Major League Baseball as part of the sign stealing scandal in Carlos Beltran? It'll be interesting to see how voters treat something like that. We saw how they responded to Roberto Alomar. And again, I don't know this firsthand, but it's a guy who gets in very easily in year 2. Year 1, where was the support? Well, there was the incidents where he spit on an umpire. So you know what? He's not going to be a first-year ballot guy, but he's clearly a Hall of Famer. Is Beltran held out for a year or more? He kind of already had a questionable, I think, candidacy. Not questionable, but just like, all right, it's not a slam dunk. I think you got to look into it a little bit further. Bobby Abreu is like the poor man's, Carlos Beltran in a lot of ways. That being said, if you're the rich man's Bobby Abreu, you probably should be a Hall of Famer, but that's going to hurt his cause a little bit. So, maybe Wheeler sneaks in ahead of him. Something that, I don't think we've ever had 2 Hall of Famers ever traded for each other, right?
I don't know. We have to look back in history. My guess is at some point it happened, but who knows? Looking at the voting this past year, Beltran was at 57%. I think that was either his second or third year on the ballot.
Right.
So I ultimately think Beltran gets in. Switch hitter, when you look at the switch hitters throughout MLB history, he compares very favorably. But yeah, I mean, I thought for sure he would have got in. Maybe not first ballot, but second ballot. And yeah, I think the Astros stain has held it back a little bit. But at some point, I think you have to look at the track record and give him a break on that because that was absolute end. I think he suffered enough. It's crazy because he had a manager job that got taken away from him. He got punished more than I think most of the people involved with the Astros sign stealing scandal. AJ Hinch has been back in a dugout for a while now. And Cora as well. But Beltran still now just in the Mets front office in some roving role. We'll see.
I got a good one for you. I'm probably one of only 100 or so people that saw Carlos Beltran as a Mets manager, hired in the 2019-2020 offseason at the winter meetings. He was there sitting at the table at the manager's breakfast that we have, talking with New York reporters. He was there. And then all hell breaks loose. And so, never got to manage on the field, never got to really do much with the public in general as the manager that offseason. But I did see him at the Mets table as the Mets manager representing the organization at the 2019 winter meetings in San Diego. So I don't know what that's worth, but there's a story for you.
Yeah, no, I remember it well. I remember being on the Zoom for his introductory press conference with Mets Marais at the time, and I was on there. But yeah, it was 2 months as the Mets manager. I don't know if it still counts. Like, does he count as a Mets manager when he never managed a game?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was Wally Backman ever a Diamondbacks manager, right? He got hired and let go within 4 days. It's the big what if.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how history remembers that, and if Beltran ever does get another shot to manage a big league team. We got one last topic for the show today, though. You alluded to it earlier. William Contreras. Is he now the best catcher in baseball? Adley Rutschman has earned that title over the last few years, but William Contreras, the way he's swinging the bat as maybe the best hitter on a Brewers team that has been way better than any of us expected, really leading them, I don't know. I think he's got a case to potentially be the best catcher in baseball. And if so, can we say the Braves lost that trade for Sean Murphy? It worked out, but maybe they should have just kept Contreras.
And they could have had a tandem of Travis d'Arnaud and Contreras and then a couple extra bucks to throw around somewhere. Right. I think it's a great conversation to have with William Contreras. I think best player, that's where we're going to have that debate now. I think you have to say he's been the most valuable catcher to his team, right? He's been a huge part of that success. In fact, in an article I wrote up last week about Mookie Betts being this runaway candidate for National League MVP, and I thought, well, there's really only 2 candidates, one of them being Fernando Tatis Jr., who voters could hold the PED business against. And so that might not go so well. But William Contreras could be that other guy where, they lose their manager, but they retain their on-field manager in William Contreras. What he's been able to do with a rotation that obviously lost Brandon Woodruff, Corbin Burns via the trade to the Orioles, and what he's been able to do at the plate. I think you can argue that he's easily been the most valuable catcher in all of baseball. 372 batting average, 1034 OPS going into Sunday. He's been 1 for his last 10, but 20 RBI, tied for 6th most in MLB. He's been pivotal in that lineup, even providing some protection for Christian Yelich, who was looking like he was having a breakout year there.
Yeah, he's been ridiculously good. Contreras has, and yeah, I think that's an interesting thought that I didn't even really, put into my mind much, was the MVP case. And look, if the Brewers find their way to win that division, which is certainly still in the cards for them with how they played so far, with that rotation, and he would be contributing on both sides for them, absolutely, he is an MVP candidate. It's pretty crazy to think about how well he has played defensively. I think was the big surprise. Milwaukee has gotten a lot of credit for being able to turn these guys into better pitch framers. I know Omar Narvaez was another guy that wasn't a good defensive catcher, goes there, all of a sudden he's grading out well. So you can say the same thing for Contreras. And the funny thing is his brother has been very good this year as well. Wilson Contreras gotten off to a great start. The catcher position as a whole, I feel like over the last maybe 3 to 5 years has just taken a definite step up, where you have guys finally that are able to contribute both defensively and with the bat, which there was a point in time where I felt like there was maybe 5 catchers in all of baseball that could swing it at all. And now we're seeing a long list of guys that are doing it for teams on both sides.
It was Yadier Molina, Buster Posey. I'm missing one other guy, but you're right. There's a lot of really great catchers. Fortunate about your guy, Francisco Alvarez, there in New York. Again, a great, exciting backstop there. Salvador Perez, has to be another one of those guys where you say Hall of Fame career. I think he probably has less work to do than someone like Zach Wheeler. Just kind of, compiling numbers a little bit. He's got 4 homers, 12 RBI over his last 10 games, close to a 350 batting average in that time. As you said, Williams' brother, Wilson, has been great in 19 games. He's only had 3 offers, so he's putting bat on the ball, getting the ball in play. Struggled that first week, but hitting 333. Since then, you got Cal Raleigh, big dumper. I mean, he's been great. He's been pivotal in the Mariners' turnaround after a rough start. Again, both defensively, dealing with that rotation, and hitting right in the middle of that lineup. He's been great. And Patrick Bailey is having somewhat of a resurgence, a guy who's more there for the defensive end of the spectrum. And no, he's been great at the plate for a Giants team that's struggling a little bit. That's something I might need to write about here soon.
Yeah, no, for sure. The Giants as a whole, and just this position is crazy. And Perez was a good mention too, because I don't think that we can call him the best catcher in baseball, because just defensively at 33 years old, how good can he be? Although actually Fangraphs has him as a plus defender this year, which is interesting. Yeah. So really a fountain of youth coming off a couple years where he didn't look like the same guy. I pulled up the all-time list of catchers when it comes to home runs. Where would you think he ranks, just off the top of your head? How high up?
Ooh, okay. Well, I believe Mike Piazza has the most home runs for a catcher now. Are we saying home runs like he did it while he was a catcher and not a DH? I think that number might be around 365, 360. And Perez, has he gotten 300 yet? I think he might be pretty close. I mean, he did have that big year in 2021, was there at the Home Run Derby, put on an absolute show. That was amazing. And he's been pretty durable. I'll give him 23 homers a season for 13 years. Some quick math. I don't know. I would say he's probably at 280 career homers.
He's at 252. Now the list that I pulled, I think it's just compiling careers, because it's got Piazza at 399. I don't think Salvador Perez is touching him, but at 252, he just tied Javi Lopez to move into the top 10. Ooh. He's 9 behind Jorge Posada. He's 30 behind Brian McCann. Then you get to Gary Carter, Pudge Rodriguez, Lance Parrish, Yogi Berra, Johnny Bench, Carlton Fisk, and then Piazza. Can he squeak out 100 more home runs in his career? I think maybe the highest he can get is past Berra and Bench. I don't think he can touch Piazza, but Salvador Perez, when you look at that position in particular, the longevity that he's been able to have, he's got an interesting Hall of Fame case. I'm looking at the hits. He's at 1440. So I don't know. I don't know if he's quite a Hall of Famer. I didn't think that Joe Mauer was going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, though. And he just sailed right into Cooperstown. So based on that curve that's maybe been set as far as the production you can get from a catcher, if he can do this for a whole season and be the best offensive catcher again at age 33 and maybe have a couple more good years, he might have a good case at Cooperstown when it's all said and done.
Jaws statistic we both love. Jay Jaffe's win share system for showing where a guy ranks all time at his position. Perez is only at 33 right now, but again, when you look at those home runs, the 6 of the top 7 guys, Lance Parrish, very good career, but 6 of the top 7 home run leaders are in the Hall of Fame. So I think, with 60 some more, if he's able to pass someone like Pudge Rodriguez, I think that allows him to do it. But again, going back to Joe Mauer, going back to, I think it's a different conversation with Yadier Molina because he did play a while but didn't have the offensive stats. I think if you can have a big 10-year stretch, which I think Perez has, but not have all those big flashy numbers, you can still get in, which Mauer was able to do. Perez winning the World Series in 2015 with the Royals, I think goes a really long way. Buster Posey, I don't know where he ranks all time with catchers and offensive numbers because he didn't play very long, but he's got 3 rings. So he's getting in the Hall of Fame. And Molina did play a while, doesn't have the numbers. He's got a ring for himself. He'll eventually get in. So I think Perez, the conversation, even right now, even if he's just okay for 5 more years, he seems like one of those guys that wants to play a long time. 5 more years of being okay, averaging, say, 15 homers, which might even be low for him. I think he'll be a Hall of Famer in no time.
It's pretty ridiculous to think about what he's done, and 8-time All-Star, 5-time Gold Gloves for Salvador Perez. So you really start to look at the resume. 4 Silver Sluggers. Maybe he gets a 5th one this year. I wonder how many guys in the Hall, when it comes to catchers, have 5 Gold Gloves, 5 Silver Sluggers. It's a really good case, and I thought the reason why I went to his Baseball Reference is I was like, was he that World Series MVP in 2015? Tough memory for me, but yes, in fact, he was the World Series MVP on top of it all. So really does have a lot of hardware to bolster his case. The counting stats don't necessarily jump out when you see, maybe he doesn't get to 2,000 hits, but when it's at that position, when he's won that many awards, I think, he's got a chance. Maybe the best. Certainly probably the best active career of any active catcher because of how long he's been doing it. Getting back to the initial conversation with the young guys, though, we should mention Adley Rutschman, I think is one, and Will Smith is the other one. I know they were 1 and 2 on our list. What does William Contreras have to do to actually leapfrog them next year when Just Baseball is ranking our top 10 catchers? What do we need to see from Contreras to actually put him above those guys and actually call him the best catcher in baseball?
Yeah, I think he's just going to continue to hit. I think that's going to be a critical part for him. Defense, he's not been favorable to him, some of the defensive metrics. So, but we know that, again, that at least personally, I think some of the defensive metrics, we haven't figured that out just yet, how to value those guys. And then there's also the element of how well his rotation does and giving the catcher a little bit of that credit. So I think a lot of those rankings have more to do with the offensive output, thinking of it more from that fantasy baseball perspective, right? So he's just going to have to continue to hit, right? High average is going to be a critical part. If he's sitting in the middle of the lineup, still, he's going to have those RBI. That's going to be really important. But even then, he might need to do more than that because Will Smith, he's got a better lineup all around him there in LA, and JT Realmuto has been doing it for so long in his career. He's on the wrong side of 30 now. We're starting to see maybe him break down just a tiny bit. So that's a guy he could possibly leapfrog. But you started off by saying that there's a glut of really good catchers right now in the game, and we were kind of overdue for that. So it's going to be a challenge for him to do that. But if he can be an all-star this year, that kind of puts him on the map, keeps his name out there. It's interesting how those kind of little things like that can factor in a big way, and getting some MVP votes. I think things like that can be critical, and maybe breaking a tie between someone like him and a JT Realmuto, where you say, well, Realmuto has a better career, but I think we're seeing some changing tides here, and I think now it's Contreras that's ahead. Look at what he did, MVP. Brewers go to the postseason. A lot of it can be narrative based in order for Contreras to start to rise and maybe be a top 5 catcher in all of baseball when we do the 2025 rankings for Just Baseball.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we might have had him in the 3 this year. I think we were really high on him because we just value what he did, and we saw Real Muto as a guy that seems to be on his way out. Maybe not from being a top 10 catcher in baseball, was certainly a top 5 with the rough year he had. To me, I think what he has to do to separate himself from Rutschman and Smith is lead that Brewers team to the playoffs, especially with Yelich being out right now. The fact that he's kept them afloat. It's interesting you mentioned the whole defensive metrics thing. Because actually, in my head, I'm thinking, all right, pitch framing. When you have Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff throwing to you, do your grades look better because you're getting more strike calls because umpires are going to give them the call more than Colin Ray is going to get a call, or Joe Ross, so I wonder if that's maybe weighing down the metrics. But if this Brewers team is great and they find their way to win that division yet again, and Contreras hit 320 with 27 home runs and he drove in 100 and he was just there every day, whether he's catching or being put into the DH spot, but he gets 150 plus games played from that grueling position and stays as a constant threat in that lineup. I think there's going to be a narrative that really starts to build around him. Whereas Rutschman and Smith are part of these teams that are so good that life's a little bit easier on them. But I think the workload that Contreras is going to have to carry to bring his team to where they want to go, that might give him that recognition. Right now, I think I would be out in front by saying he's the best catcher in baseball. But I'm leaning that way. I think, defensively, there might be some points where you look at Smith or Rutschman, but I just think that as a pure hitter, maybe that's it. Maybe he's the best hitter from the catcher position. That might be a little bit less of a stretch, but I love what he's done so far. And I think the sky's the limit for him. And the Braves lost a trade too. How about that?
There you go. You look, see, it all works out. You're nice to the Phillies. You have some Atlanta slander.
There you go.
That's fantastic for that. Yeah, right. Will Smith and Adley Rutschman are the only two that were ahead of him in the Just Baseball top 5 rankings. So I mean, he has been, pretty much as y'all predicted. Those of you that made the list, he has come to fruition on that. Some numbers behind the scenes, like you said, with the pitch framing, he's in the 4th percentile, not as in like the top 4. That's 96% of baseball catchers are better at framing than him. 13th percentile for caught stealing above average, blocks above average in the 33rd percentile. So again, the defense would be one of those areas to round out, a playing style or the success that you have, because catcher is one of those key defensive positions. And once you get to the top, that's a big separator. You have to be more well-rounded. Going back to something we talked about earlier, Gold Glove awards by catchers, 2 Hall of Famers with a lot. Pudge Rodriguez, 13, Johnny Bench, 10. Yadier Molina has the 3rd most all time. We think he's probably an eventual Hall of Famer with 9. And then you got Salvador Perez, 5. So if you're looking at Hall of Fame guys, Perez is there. I think Bill Freehand's going to be a Veterans Committee guy. I know this is probably a better conversation for the offseason, but Bill Freehan, great catcher with the Tigers. He had 5. I think he'll eventually get in. Jim Sumberg has 6. I don't think he has any shot. Bob Boone, no shot with 7. So that's pretty much the top 6 or 7 guys all time. So Perez, looking at it defensively with that award, he goes down as one of the all-time greats. So if you want to be one of the best catchers in your sport, you do that by winning the Gold Glove Award, and then you make a conversation to be one of the greatest of all time. And so that's the piece. That's the piece that Contreras needs, that I think we've pinpointed. He's got to get better defensively.
And the reason why the Braves traded him was because of the defense. He was not a good defender in 2022, although he hit. Last year, that was the component that shocked everybody. He was looking at 93rd percentile in framing. So it was in there that they got it. Like I mentioned before, I don't know how much the guys who are thrown to you impacts framing? Is he not getting calls, or they're just guys who aren't living on the edges enough where he's able to rack up those stats? Again, it's one of the toughest positions to grade out, but he's making a case for himself. So we got to see the defense tick up. We got to see what the Brewers do this year. But he is definitely one of the most exciting young catchers in the game to watch right now. And we'll see if he can actually grab that title by the end of the season. But that's going to wrap up our topics for today. Glad that I was back for another episode of Who's Better Baseball. We'll have one coming your way on Sunday. Why don't you tell the people where they can follow us on Twitter?
At Who's Better BB on the X.
On the X. Who's Better BB? If you're watching, you can find our personals on the side there. And all of these conversations that we had today, all 5, I'll be breaking them up into more bite-sized videos for the YouTube channel. So if you came in at the end, you can listen to any of the beginning conversations, and the full podcast will be going up on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. So make sure to subscribe there, follow us, subscribe on YouTube, do all the good stuff for us, and we will be back on Sunday.